Welcome everyone to this virtual edition of Policy Learning Team training called Case Note Categories. I'm your host, Gretchen Aikema, and along with my co-host, Laura Cheney, we're going to dive into a topic that historically has not had much guidance.
We'll have some new reporting information to cover, as well as introduce a handy new desk aid to help us as we do this work.
Our learning objectives for today are: understand why data is reported from case notes, understand your role in accurate data reporting, and be able to choose the correct case note category. As with any training, it's important to set the context of our discussion. Where within the VR process does this apply? So let's first begin with focusing in on the background and why we are having this training. Sometimes it can feel like there's a disconnect from the data reporting and the true intent of the VR program. We've heard that from staff, and you may feel the same. Why do we have so much data reporting? As you know, there are many different requirements under the Rehab Act that lead us to employment outcomes for the individuals that VR serves. Some of those requirements say that VR must report certain data points to the Rehabilitation Services Administration, or RSA. Some of that gets reported in a report called the RSA 911, while other data actually lives in other ways within our agency, like our policies, our procedures, how our case management system is set up, our case files, or in case notes. So there's a lot of things that are going on in the VR program as a whole. The purpose of all this information collection is to tell the story of the VR program. It talks about all the services VR provides to individuals with disabilities. And then it describes the outcomes, both educational and employment related, that the people who our program serves obtain. RSA uses that data they've obtained through this collection for lots of different purposes. They report this data to Congress, to the President, and to other entities within the federal government. They also use this data collected through the RSA 911 to calculate performance measures for the VR program. Recently, Minnesota VR had an RSA monitoring review, so you may have heard feedback about RSA using 911 data in those reviews. RSA also uses 911 data to provide technical assistance to help with programmatic planning and to help agencies at the state level plan for the operations of their programs, whether that's in regards to service delivery or preparing budgets. As I mentioned, one of the data collection reports is called the RSA 911. Each state reports 911 information to RSA. The RSA 911 is where you report everything that's happening for individuals who are receiving services from VR. So through the 911 is how you're actually going to show what services and supports were provided to help individuals access job-driven trainings and to pursue high-quality employment outcomes. Today, we're going to zero in on one part of the RSA 911 report, which is reporting non-purchase services. Non-purchase services are just that, services provided to the individual that aren't purchased. In our recent RSA audit, it was found that Minnesota appears to be providing very few non-purchase services, which we know isn't the case. For example, according to the data, we were providing almost no benefits counseling to our participants. And that was shocking information because we know how much emphasis and work we've put into providing benefits counseling. Currently, this data is being reported from the employment plan, but the accuracy is low. We need to increase our reporting of non-purchase services through our case management system. So various avenues were discussed with the help of your peer counselors, techs, specialists, and managers, and it was determined that starting July 1st, 2020, we're going to accomplish this work by reporting non-purchase services through specific case note categories, very much like we're already reporting pre-ETs through case notes. It's important to know that one of the alternatives to reporting in case notes was reporting them through a whole new activity status system. Careful consideration was taken to choose the option that would be accurate, but also put the least amount of work onto the plates of field staff. While none of the options make reporting happen completely behind the scenes, Reporting from case notes does blend well to the work you're already doing in case notes. It's also about increasing transparency about the VR program and its great work. We don't want to undersell the outstanding work happening in Minnesota. Accurate reporting means you're giving yourself credit for the hard work you're doing. In short, we use 9/11 data for lots of different reasons. And it's important that we're collecting data that's accurate and reliable so that we can tell the full story of the VR program and all the good work that Minnesota VR is doing.
Keeping in mind that our lens on this training is reporting non-purchase services from case notes, I will introduce a new desk aid, which will help us do this work. This desk aid was created because we've never had specific guidance for case note category selection. Staff were told to do their best or choose which category made sense to them. Going forward, there needs to be statewide consistency with how categories are selected for non-purchase services, and we need to be intentional about the case note category that is selected. You may want to have this desk aid handy for this portion of the training. It's available on SharePoint under Forms. Pause the video now to get out your desk aid and push play when you are ready to continue. Here's the new case note category desk aid. Please note that this desk aid is the only place to find information about reportable case note categories. You'll notice that the desk aid is broken into 3 sections. Starting from the left is the case note category, which is the field you will populate in Workforce One when creating the case note. The middle section is a description of when that case note category would be selected. The section to the far right informs staff if the category is reported to RSA. If the category no longer exists, it offers guidance on which category to use, or it indicates which categories are new. You will also notice that the desk aid shows the categories that are reported to RSA in green, and new categories are highlighted in yellow. Our focus today are the categories that are highlighted in green, which we'll talk about next. Again, this desk aid is important to keep handy because it's the only place to find information about reportable case note categories. As you know, guidance has been given that when we are reporting pre-ETS activities, specific pre-ETS categories need to be selected in Workforce One. We are approaching non-purchase services in the same way. Let's look at the case note categories that will be reported from case notes. So we're back at the desk aid, and we're going to run through each case note category that's reportable and the description. So the first one is the action plan. This is an optional communication tool to clarify responsibilities with participants and their employment team. The next one, annual plan review. This is documentation of the review of an employment plan. Assessment of VR needs. Assessment of VR needs completed in Workforce One and updates to assessment of VR needs. Benefits analysis, counseling, coaching, internal staff. DB 101 estimator sessions, counseling sessions regarding benefits, benefits analysis communication, and reviewing benefits analysis report with the participant by internal VR staff. Counseling and guidance to an individual by the VR counselor or rehabilitation representative. IEP meeting. This is a description of IEP meetings attended by VR staff. Independent living services, internal staff. This is used for discussing or providing IL service information by internal VR staff. Information and referral to other agencies for services that VR is not providing by internal VR staff. Intake or interview for VR and other services provided by internal VR staff. Job placement 60-day check-in, internal staff. Job placement communication update, internal staff. This is the 2-week communication updates from placement or job coaching staff by internal VR staff. Job placement customized employment, internal staff. This is job development, job coaching, visual resume, discovery, job analysis, and CPE meetings by internal VR staff. Job placement first shift, internal staff. Job placement follow-up, internal staff. Use this when the staff is working to document communication with the participant after the job hire has occurred by internal VR staff. And then job placement referral, a referral for a specific job regardless of whether or not the person obtains the job by internal VR staff. Job search assistance, assistance including preparing a resume, identifying job opportunities, developing interview skills, mock interviews, labor market research, informational interviews, and contacting employers by internal VR staff. Placement plan meeting, internal staff. This is for placement plan meetings attended by the counselor or placement staff and placement plan amendments by internal VR staff. Now we're going to cover those pre-ETS activities categories. So pre-ETS, instruction and self-advocacy. It's used for arranging for or providing opportunities to learn about disability and its impact, requesting accommodations or assistive technology. Pre-ETS job exploration counseling is used for arranging for or providing counseling regarding vocational interests, labor market information, etc. Pre-ETS post-secondary education counseling is used for arranging for or providing assistance to the student with enrolling or remaining enrolled in a post-secondary education institution. Pre-ETS work-based learning is used for arranging and providing career mentorship, informational interviews, etc. And then pre-ETS workplace readiness training is used for arranging for and providing communication and interpersonal skills, employer expectations, navigating transportation, etc. For each of these categories, we want to remind you to use your pre-ETS desk aid. Next one, rehabilitation technology, internal staff. This is rehabilitation technology consultation, assessment, and recommendations by internal VR staff. Small business, internal staff. It's used for information regarding approval, implementation, and support for a small business plan by internal VR staff. And the last category that is going to be reported from case notes is vocational testing. And this is used for vocational testing, setup, and or results. So that was a review of the reportable case note categories. As you may have noticed, a lot of the categories are duplicated and are identifying services that are provided by internal staff versus external staff. It's going to be important when you are selecting the case note category that if the service was provided by VR staff, the category chosen is the one that ends in internal staff. All of the categories that end in external staff are reported through authorizations because we've purchased those services through outside vendors. It should be noted that staff working with independent living centers and providing services are considered external staff. If you are paying for the services, it's external. For example, for the first milestone of a PBA, which is writing the placement plan, both the external placement provider and the VRS counselor are present at that meeting and providing services to write the placement plan. The case note category, placement plan meeting, internal staff, is what the counselor should use to label their case note. As staff begin to use the desk aid and carefully consider their case note category selections, we'll learn more and adjustments may be needed in the future. Ask questions, talk to your peers, and consult. Field staff have a direct role in the information that goes to RSA on the 9/11. It's been noticed that the VR agency's staff time is underreported the most. How that's going to start happening as of July 1st, 2020 is through the case note categories that you are selecting for non-purchase services. We begin to provide non-purchase services from the moment an individual is eligible for VR services. We provide non-purchase services whether the person has an employment plan or not. Lean on your desk aid and the case note category descriptions to help you accurately select the case note category. Once an employment plan is developed, in addition to using the desk aid, staff will want to ensure that the case note categories that are being reported to RSA for non-purchase services are also reflected on an employment plan. For example, college. Even though a VR agency can't provide that service as an agency, it may not be purchasing the service because the student received funding through another entity. The VR agency and the counselor are likely pretty involved in that student pursuing his or her degree program. So when we look at that 9/11 data, we want to see all of that effort and time reflected because the coordination of that service still counts, and it still helps us tell a story of the VR program. You may have noticed as we reviewed the desk aid, there are categories we did not discuss, and there are also 7 case note categories that were removed. You may have some questions about these categories. If the category no longer exists, the desk aid offers guidance on which category to use instead. While reviewing these is out of scope for this training, you will have an opportunity to have a team discussion about these categories at a future team meeting. In the meantime, just do your best in selecting the non-reported categories. We made it through the desk aid. Woo! A couple of helpful reminders. In early 2020, PLT created a training specific to the content of case notes. As part of that training, a Workforce One tutorial video was created. That video is available on SharePoint under Help, then Workforce One resources. Some things to remember when creating case notes is that more than one case note category can be selected. Staff are able to select up to 5 case note categories. The subject line is also a good way to indicate what the case note is about if the category doesn't fully capture the content of the case note. Within the case note summary page, staff are able to filter case notes by category, which would allow staff to narrow down case note results and assist in finding case notes about a specific category.
Going forward from today, watch for this topic to visit your local team meeting. This dedicated time will allow for further discussion about the case note categories, and there will also be a short activity.